Michèle at Jasami Bookworm Podcast, and this has been an exciting month. I am just chatting with authors, and in particular today, it's a slightly different situation because our author actually has another publishing company. So his book is published through that. We'll chat about a little bit. But Jasami is always happy to share and be part of and advertise and work with other publishers. So today I would like to welcome Alan Porteous. Am I saying it correctly, Alan?
Absolutely correct. Yes, Michelle. Thank you. Nice to be here.
I'm delighted to have you, and I'm delighted to chat about the book. So, first off, as a writer, let's chat about that. What what's the subject of the book that you've written about?
Okay, so all the books I think I've written so far have been about football. So it's all about I think they said to me at the start, write what you know about, and I go and see a lot of football. So it seemed a natural thing to write about that. My first book, which was called Glory Hunting, was all about adult football and people going to football matches. This is a children's book, um, with a bit more of a story base to it, a little bit of intrigue and adventure and excitement to it as well. So it's about a little boy that starts his own football team, and strange things starting to happen to him along the way. So yeah, that was it. Write what you know.
Right, which so you go to lots of football. Would you care to share who you support in
Should
football?
I? I don't know. But that would might be either embarrassing or put people off. I don't know. I support my local football team, Airdrie, and I think I've always been drawn to the underdog a little bit. A lot in my area. A lot of people go and support Rangers and Celtic and the big teams, but I've always felt it was more character building, I think, to go and support a smaller team, and it certainly has been character building over the years, definitely. But it's given me a good position to be able to talk about grassroots football, I like to think.
Well, before I lived in the States for a while, and I used to watch American football with my dad. And got him into it. And I would normally support the local teams, but the New Orleans, the Saints, they used to lose all the time. And I loved them so much, and I would support them just because they lost.
Mm.
But they would
Yeah.
stay in there. And it was, never say die. When I lived in San Diego, I obviously supported the Chargers.
Hmm.
So I did try to stick to local teams. And I think that's really important because everyone can support the larger team, and you can still do that if you want to as well, but feeling that local part, and it's closer to you. So you've written about football, and it's based about children. Are the children's characters, have they, did they originate, were they sparked by interest in people who watch the matches, imagining them and their characters, or where did uh your character come from?
I was hoping you weren't going to ask that. I don't really know where the characters came from. I knew I had to create a football team, so I tried to create 14 or 15 characters that were pretty diverse. Really, they came from all walks of life. Um, some of them, one of the wee boys has an international football playing dad. Others have butchers and bakers and candlestick makers as their parents, and yeah, I just tried to create something out of my imagination that would be a little bit diverse and maybe created, some character interaction. It's as diverse as they could possibly be. I think.
So I always ask writers, might be a tough one as well, but what's the process that you do? Do you sit down and just write, and everything unfolds? Do you do character descriptions? So what's the process you follow, Alan?
I don't have much process at all. I don't think, and I always feel I should be a lot more organized. I'm doing a series of books now, and I feel I should start off and have a plan and know exactly where it's going to go. it never works that way. I think if I was to wait to do that, I don't think I would start. I'm a terrible procrastinator. So I just start. I have a vague idea of what I'm wanting to write about, and it kind of goes from there. I did. I was a little bit guilty more of writing and writing, and then having to go backwards and install some plot devices or what have you, because I now have thought about something I wanted to talk about but hadn't mentioned it anywhere else. So my English teacher will be turning in her grave, thinking about about this whole admission, because I clearly understand how I should write, but I never do it that way. It's all a little bit hodgepodge.
Well, actually, what you say is true to you. A
Mm,
writer's process is true to the writer themselves. You
mm,
know, some of them they absolutely have to outline, they have to do character descriptions. You know, I've taken enough writing classes myself that they say you should do this. But I think if it's going to hold back the creativity and hold back the writing,
mm,
I recently had an interview with another writer, and she says it's very important just getting it down. You can always
mm,
go back and edit, but if you don't put anything down, and she said you can't edit a blank page, which I thought was just phenomenal, which is very, very true. The
mm,
editing process can be quite difficult, you know, at times, and it's, you know, understanding it and accepting that things do need to be improved. I
mm.
have started the book, I have to admit, and it's a page turner. You know, the characters are great. I really do enjoy them. Do you have who's your main character? Let's chat about him a little bit.
Okay, so Finn Silver is the main character. He's a very responsible, probably older than his years character. I would suggest he's yeah, the team play in the under 15 league. So I think when the book starts, Finn's 13 years old, but he's a bit of an old soul, I would suggest, and he's quite responsible. He's far more responsible than I would ever be. I think I've maybe created the character that I would have liked to have been when I was a younger boy. But he's very much the driver of the team and the captain of the team, and he's quite a straight-laced character. I would suggest. He's got a little friend Josh who's a little bit more humorous and prone to, it kind of acts as the humor in the story a little bit more. So they're quite an interesting couple together. There's quite an interesting dynamism between them.
So I know a secret that I'm going to tell everyone because, you know, that don't tell Michelle a secret, it'll get out. It'll get out. And as they say, if you tell one person a secret, it's no longer a secret. The illustrations in the book and the cover, who did them?
Yeah, well, I did that as well. Um,
So was it cart horse? Did the illustrations come first before the story, or did the story come and then you created the illustrations?
no, I had the book written, and cartooning was an old hobby of mine, going back to my teens. So I just kind of thought, I quite like the idea of a, dare I say, a cheap cover that I could do myself. I kind of I decided that I wasn't going to be very good on Photoshop or what have you, but I had a bash at. I thought I've got these illustrative skills, so if I can draw something that's quite impactful, um, then I'd have a bash at that before I went down the line of getting somebody to design the cover for me. And hopefully it actually came out quite well, I think. So it's got a quite both the books have got quite a striking cover to them. So it's worked reasonably well, I think.
I love the illustrations in it. And one of the characters, it's, you know, the facial expression, it's just so detailed. And I guess that's where you know, the part about creating cartoons and, you know, what you
Yeah.
put into it is done. So when you create the illustration, do you do pencil or do you create it on a computer or how do you do
A bit,
that?
it's a bit of everything, really. I draw them freehand to start with in an old traditional fashion. And then was a while ago I did it. If I remember rightly, I then photographed them and put them into a package, a sketching package on my iPad, and I got my iPen out and I sketched over the original drawing, and then shaded in and coloured in. So it gave me a kind of grayscale that was quite nice. So yeah, it was probably I'm sure someone will say there's a far easier way of doing this than you chose to do, but it worked at the time, and yeah, it's not bad. I was a little bit concerned about. I don't know if you'll agree with me or not. I was a little bit concerned about drawing the characters because part of a book is that you form your own in your own mind the picture of the character. And one of the cartoons is an actual team photograph of the whole squad of players, and I found myself drawing them as I saw them, which then leads the reader into seeing them in a particular way. And it actually came out quite well, and I thought that's good. That's the way I see them. And then I thought, hold on a minute, should I have done that? Should I have just left people to their own devices to picture them in a certain way? I don't know.
Actually, I think it leads in quite well so that when people go and read that, you've read the first book and you see the team illustration, and then when you read the second and soon to be the third and such, when you go
Mhm.
forward with that, they will still be in your mind. So I think
Mm,
creating that definitely creates a brand.
mm,
They'll recognize that character when they see it, and it will be associated with your story. So I think it's a wonderful idea, and I think it's a great way to give people something to visualize. I will
mm,
admit when I read a book, I it's like a movie in my head. But if you give me something to help with the movie in the head, that's great. I do enjoy it. I do enjoy it. So now since you, with the process, when you're working on the book, do you have a regular regimen of you write so many hours per day, or do you leave it to a day where it's creative, morning, night? What's the writing process you follow, Alan?
I try to be quite regular. However, I'm very conscious that I can tell very quickly if I'm going to be productive or not. So, I can 2 hours gives you a paragraph one night, and then the next night 2 hours gives you a chapter. There just seems to be no rhyme or reason to it. I still have a 9 to 5 job as well, so a lot of the demands fall around that. You have a hard day at work, and sometimes the last thing you want to do is open up the laptop again and sit and look at us, and type away when you've been doing it all day. So yeah, it's many and varied. I've not sat down and allocated myself working hours. I sometimes fear as well that this started very much as a hobby for me, and an enjoyable hobby. And I think sometimes if you put too much discipline and too many, I have to do this amount of hours in a day, that it takes the shine off it, takes the enjoyment out of it, and I might not want to do it again.
So
So
that begs the question, would you ever do National Novel Writing Month in November, NaNoWriMo, where you have to write a 50,000 word uh, novella in 1 month? Do you think you could, is that something that just, nope,
oh
it
yeah, 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 yeah.
intrigues
I
you?
like targets. I like targets. I've entered short story competitions in the past, and things, and given myself a bit of a deadline. So no, I've got no problem with it. I think if there's an end product to it as well, there's something. I kind of feel that maybe it's just because I'm early days. I think probably in my author career, that when I first started writing, I didn't really see an end product to it. I didn't think anybody would like the books. I didn't know where it was going to go. So it was a little bit of an open-ended project. The first book I wrote, I only wrote it to see if I could write something with a beginning, a middle, and an end to it.
That's a good
Which,
goal.
yeah, yeah. And that, hopefully, that proved the point to a degree, to take me on to the next stage, which was going to be a little bit more, uh, had a little bit more of an end goal to it.
And creating the characters, were any of the characters that you created a surprise when you created them, or did they kind of fall in line?
I think they mostly fell in line. Yeah, yeah. I think I started as well with the notion that I wanted to write a children's book that didn't have too many. current issues to it, dare I say it. I kind of get the feel that kids grow up a little bit too quickly these days. So it was writing characters and plot lines that were adventurous without being controversial and what have you. So the characters, I think when they were going to steer into awkward situations or trains of thought that would might have been interesting and maybe more stimulating. I veered away from it a little bit. I wanted the story to tell it, to bear out rather than, get into the realms of, as I say, modern issues. It's very much an entertaining read without that to a degree.
And I know you've called it a children's book, but I would say from 9 to 90, because although it's an easy read for children, well, depending on, what their reading level is, it is an easy read. It's a comfortable read, but it's not dumbed down at all. I mean, it's a really great read, for it, and I recommend it because much as I would like to say I'm still a child, I'm slightly older than that, and I'm enjoying it too, which
Mm.
is important. So when it comes to the characters, as you said, you wanted to create a world for them that didn't deal with any, too many realistic issues. And, for 9 to 90, it's a great read. I love some of the quirks that you have given some of the characters. I think that's a wonderful realism to it. When you do that with your characters, and do they live in your mind or, keep you company when you're writing the book? Or is it something that once they're down on paper, they just kind of exit the scene?
No, I know. I think they're there. These are the main books I have written, and I've written two of them now in the series, and the characters are kind of growing with me a little bit, and I feel that they become my friends in many ways. I can see that they're a group of people, and I don't see them. I, I, I'm hoping I'm not going to lose any of them along the way. I don't want to. And because the debate now is that every year is a new season with this football team, and as they grow, there may well be situations that families move away. People don't want to continue to be footballers anymore. Um, I'm going to try and keep them all together because I like them all.
Well, I think the wonderful part about being a writer and a benefit is that when we talk about the voices in our heads, there are characters in a story. People generally don't need to worry about it. Is there a character that's grown more than you expected through the series, through the 4 volumes, the 2 books?
Yes, I think the main non-child character is a an older chap, an interesting character called the bookkeeper, and I think he grew a little bit more than I thought he might because he had a backstory himself, and we knew very very little about him at the start. That was he was in many ways the first glimpse at a mystery here that this wasn't just going to be a book about a little boy playing football games and winning a league. So this bookkeeper character got introduced, and you knew very, very little about him. So there was a gradual feed about who he was, what his place in the story was. But then there became the opportunity to say a little bit more about him. And I was quite surprised that he had a backstory and a family and various things like that. That I thought this is good. I didn't see that. I didn't almost didn't see that coming, and it didn't really initially have a bearing on the plot. And then going back to what I was saying right at the start about I didn't, I wrote as I went along. His backstory actually offered something to the plot moving forward, um, because of his previous relationships. So I didn't see that coming. It wasn't in my original notes, which were few and far between. So yeah, it was interesting.
So, with the book, and I know it's taken you several years, you did the original one was published years ago by someone who shall remain nameless, and then you found a great publisher who is working on them now. Thunder Dog Creative is your publisher? I believe.
Yes, that's it. Thunderdogs Creative. Yeah.
Excellent, excellent. So I think that's important to find a great publisher who actually believes in what you're doing and then will follow through with the process in it.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
Did- Um, so we've talked about the process for writing. What about editing? Did you follow, how did that go for you?
Editing was terrible. I mistakenly thought I could do it myself, and it's a cardinal sin. I now know, but I just felt I've written my own book. I can then go back. I'm quite analytical. I used to be an accountant way back in the day. Quite analytical. I can go through this a few times and pick out my mistakes, and my English should be good enough to deal with it. It doesn't work that way. It really doesn't at all. So I think I must have edited the book about 9 or 10 times myself. I then got a friend to do it. I got another friend to do it. About a year and a half later. We were still picking out very obvious mistakes within it, and eventually, I got a friendly with a journalist who did a final edit on it, who again probably picked up even more mistakes than I had done. So yeah, I think if there was any advice for budding authors, it's get somebody lined up that's good at that sort of thing. To even if you do think you can do it yourself, you really can't.
Part of the problem with self-editing is that you can edit too much out and you can take out
Mm,
something wonderful. Also, it's about having, a reader, an editor knows what they're reading. They
mm,
understand the industry, but they also understand good editors know and can work well with an author, understanding the story and make it richer. And you've got an objective person reading it who,
mm,
is in the industry. So yes, we do suggest that to all writers out there. That will be my my suggestion. Find an editor, hopefully
mm,
sooner rather than later. But
mm,
in reading the final work, it's well been worth it all. It's well been worth the process that you've gone through, kind of thing. And I know you'll be coming through another book. So what we're going to do, this one will be a shorter little podcast here because you've sent over a reading. So we're going to do the reading for the end of our podcast to give
mm.
everybody a little bit of an idea and a taste of it, which I think will be, really enjoyable. But it's really important, I think, to understand the author and the writer behind it, behind the published author that gives it. And the reason we're doing this is we don't usually do it at the end of a podcast, but this is an unusual book from the perspective of it fills a niche that actually a lot of books don't. And now you understand football a lot better than I do, but I think the ones for children and adults, they're a bit games and things like that. Is that correct?
To be honest, when I was researching whether it was worthy of doing another book and indeed doing a children's book, there really wasn't very much in a storytelling sense. You find that most of the kids' books tend to be badged up around famous footballers and their football quizzes or profiles of the players involved in it. I don't know, for some reason, authors just didn't want to be creative with football, or else there's a couple and they were very, very young. It was pre 9 years old. That wasn't really my market either. So it was kind of taking on something that was a little bit more accessible as well to children when they're getting to the age that they should be reading more. I was kind of quite conscious that people I knew of that age were not reading as much as they should. But because of my friends and my family and whatever, and we were so interested in football, they had that interest. Therefore, to give them something in their sphere of interest to write about, to read, would make it so much more accessible and maybe encourage them to get into the reading side of things again. So that was, part of my plan really to do that. So yeah, it wasn't just all about writing a book, I think.
Well, I think it's important when you actually have it's important to address it to the audience, to have the proper
Mm,
audience. And you understanding your audience in advance is a lot more sophisticated than a lot of writers do. A lot of
mm,
writers will write the story, then they'll work on becoming published authors, and then they get the work of, getting it out there, but not really understanding who their audience is.
Mm,
If they write a fantasy, it might be, for, kind of YA, or it might be for older, there's different
mm.
ones. So quite knowledgeable. I think that has a lot to do with your business background and such, so it makes it. So this is a slightly different ending. We're going to do, as we always do, your shout out. We'd like to ask you to give a shout out to someone, and
Mhm.
then we are going to have that nice little reading from the book, which we'll do an introduction to. So, Alan, for a shout out to someone, and who would you like to give it to?
I think I'd like to give a shout out to my friend Ian Allison because Ian's been he laughingly calls me his my agent because he's kind of always pushed me on at difficult times when the writing of these books I think was the easy bit. To be honest, it's all the follow on to that. Dealing with. Uh, Publishing, dealing with formatting, dealing with editing, dealing with IT, looking at the formats that you can put this into, where you can get it, the routes to market. I've got a 9 to 5 job, and often that didn't fit in, or I got 5 minutes to spend to try and do as much as I could, and it didn't work, and it was getting me down. But Ian was always there to sort of say, "Come on, you need to don't give up on this now. That you've gone too far." So yeah, he's always come up with a little link or somebody to speak to at the right moment that he knew, because he's a very friendly guy that goes out and meets a lot of people. So there was always there to say, I think you should speak to this person or that person, and it always just gave me that little boost forward again when I felt I was flagging. So I think he probably deserves the shout out more than anybody.
Excellent. Well, I think that's very important to have support around you. So I think my shout out will be to all of those who support writers in a way, either whether it's just for their writing or if it's on the journey to becoming a published author. What we're going to do is in the description, we're going to put the links in about where you'll be able to purchase Alan's books. And please give us the title on the two books that are out so far.
Okay, so the first one is called The Team from Windmill Lane. And the follow-up, which is kind of a two-parter, really. It'll be a longer series, but it kind of concludes the current plot line. The second one is called Beaufort's Thunderdogs Forever.
So, in the description, we'll have the links for you to be able to purchase the book. I am not going to end it here because I'm going to continue with the introduction to your reading from the first book.
Excellent, excellent. Hopefully, it's a good choice of a little passage because it introduces all the characters, I suppose, as much as anything else. There's no football action in it or anything. The book's got lots of football action, but this is just the characters sitting around talking to each other, which was quite nice.
But we will actually have one with a little bit more action later. All right.
Mhm.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Alan. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
No, thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you for all your support.
And I will just be pausing this now for the podcast.
This is an excerpt from The Team from Windmill Lane, which is the first in the Finn Silver series, and it's from Chapter 3, Beaufort's Thunderdogs. If you had told Finn Silver a month ago he would be sitting inside a windmill in a thunderstorm with 14 other boys discussing the very specific rules of football nicknames, he would probably have laughed and said you were going a bit loopy. But here he was, in the small circular room of the old blue and white striped windmill at the end of the lane, doing exactly that. It was muggy. The rain was clattering down on the slate roof outside, and aside from the half a dozen or so glowing candles scattered around the room, the only light came from two small square windows in the wall high above the door. Sitting in a circle on old boxes or colourful deck chairs with their backs to the wall, jumping at the sound of each roll of thunder, The boys looked more like a strange ghost storytelling club than a brand new football team. It had been pointed out that, other than Josh and Finn, no one really knew each other. After a quick trip around the room where each boy said their full name out loud and felt mightily daft doing it, it also became clear that no one was very good at remembering names. Scotty Plunkett even forgot his own when it was his turn to introduce himself. And so the conversation turned to nicknames, whereby it was agreed that if everyone actually had one, it would probably make things altogether easier. What do you mean there are rules about nicknames? Josh sounded confused. Exactly what I say, Sai Kana replied, sounding highly knowledgeable in such matters. There are rules. So, what are these rules then? Josh pressed. Easy. In fact, there are really only two, Sai explained. The whole room was listening intently. The main one is known as the YOS, the YOS rule. Now, the YOS rule states that the nickname in question must end in either a Y, an O, or an S. The boys looked at him as if he had horns. Look, take a random guy in a football team. He must be in a football team, incidentally. These rules don't apply to the real world at all. The random guy's name is Ronnie Wood, okay? So, according to the YOS rule, his nickname is pretty much going to be Woody, Woodo, or Woods. Get it? Another player, Joe Higgins. His name's a bit longer, but it still works. He'd be Higgy, Higgo, or Higgs. Where does this fit in then? Asked Jordan Friend, scratching a well-freckled nose. My cousin Jeremy plays for a team, and they call him Santa. Why do they call him that? Asked Sai. Because he only turns up once a year, Jordan replied simply. Sai did his best not to laugh. Well, there's the second rule right there, he managed. You can use any other name only if there are no obvious Y's, O's, or S's available, or if the other name is so funny that it's better than using the YOS rule. Now, if you have a funny name that also ends in Y, O, or S, well, I guess you've struck gold there. And these are official football rules then, gasped a wide-eyed Todd Housemartin. I'm pretty sure this is all written down somewhere, Sai replied. Now, I bet we can go all the way round the room and get footballers' nicknames for us all. The boys all grinned and edged forward in their seats. Right, starting with you. Sai suddenly pointed at Harry Flagg, the goalie. Flaggy! Shouted someone, and everyone laughed. Maybe, teased Sai, but come on, everyone saw the way this guy can jump. The boys all nodded. So, I suggest Pogo, Sai grinned. Yes, cried Josh, it's an O, and it's better than using his name. Indeed, agreed Sai. Sitting beside Harry was Ryan Hopper. Hoppy, Hoppo or Hops, Sai shouted. Hoppy, the group all shouted back, and the decision was made. Next up was James Bond. Any thoughts? Sai asked the room. Strangely, the room was silent. Come on, guys, a great name. This one is easy, Sai pressed. James Bond. 007? I'm thinking Dubs. Ha! Excellent, shouted Finn, enjoying himself thoroughly. Todd Housemartin. Wendy House, yelled someone, and the laughter continued. Todd Housemartin looked a bit miffed. Just Wendy, perhaps. That makes it a Y, doesn't it? Sai suggested, and everyone agreed. Sorry, Todd, that's the thing about nicknames. You don't get to choose them yourself, and they're not always the most complimentary. Todd shrugged, but the makings of a smile started to leak onto his face. Moving on to Lucas here. Lucas Claydon visibly stiffened. The room went quiet again, but you could almost hear the boys' brains chugging around mechanically, trying to come up with something appropriate. Elsie? Suggested a small voice. Everyone turned and looked at Ryan Hopper, who immediately went bright red. Eh? Asked Lucas Claydon himself. Well, replied Hoppy, who now looked decidedly uncomfortable. Your name is Lucas Claydon. Your initials are LC, so Elsie. The idea hung in the air for about 3 seconds before the place exploded. Lucas sat with his face like thunder whilst the laughter died down and Hoppy was congratulated roundly. Next, Miko Przybylski. Did I get that right? Not so bad, Miko smiled, but my first name, it is Mikolaj. Shall we stick with Miko then? Pitched Si. Everyone, including Miko, nodded in relief. By the time they had completed the circle, Jordan Friend was Friendo, Si himself was Cano, Scotty Plunkett was Plunks, Martin Heathley was Snakes on account of his adorable pets. Simon Wigman became Simples when the boys discovered his dad made pies, and Georgie Summer became Gorgeous when he foolishly fixed his hair in front of everyone just as they were straining to find a decent nickname for him. Josh seemed a bit disappointed when all they could come up with was Clearly, but as Si pointed out, he already had an unusual name with a Y at the end, so that was fine. Enzo Dangerfield kept Enzo for similar reasons, which left only Finn to be considered. Come on, guys, urged Si. There must be something we can do with Finn Silver. Boss, Chief and Gaffer were all suggested, but no one could come up with anything remotely funny or memorable. Just as it looked like the team manager was going to be Finny, Finno or Finns, Simon Wigman sat bolt upright and shouted, "Aha!" All eyes fell on Simples. Well, last term we did Treasure Island in English. Long John Silver, cried someone before he could finish. So, I was thinking, LJ, what about that? Simon pressed, looking slightly annoyed that someone had beaten him to the punchline. Brilliant, Simples, Si applauded. Just brilliant. You saved us at the 11th hour. Todd Housemartin, a.k.a. Wendy, looked at his watch, then looked back at Si, confused. Finn had enjoyed the fun start to the first meeting and secretly was quite pleased with his new nickname. He looked at his teammates talking and laughing with each other. They seemed a good bunch, and he was glad he'd brought them all together. But there was something else nagging him, something he couldn't put his finger on, something beyond the thunder outside that was unsettling and not quite right. Maybe things were going too well, and he always got a bit suspicious when that happened. Maybe, all things considered, starting a football team was just a really difficult thing for a 13-year-old boy to do. But despite the humid, sweaty heat of the circular room in the windmill, Finn shivered, hugged himself, and felt distinctly uneasy.